everyone. I am here with Kaylin Applewhite. Kaylin, how you doing?
Doing good.
So Kaylin's an author, and the next book in her series, so it's the White Crow series, right?
Yep.
And you're running a Kickstarter for the third book in that campaign, or the third book in that series, which
Yep.
comes out on April 8th, right?
Yes. So that's the Kickstarter pre-sale, which predates the actual release of the book on retailers like Barnes and Noble and Amazon. It'll be on Kickstarter with like exclusive deals, signed copies and special editions, and lots of exclusive opportunities.
So, and we're gonna get into, want to talk definitely about the book, about the campaign, and everything. But first up, I always like to ask when I'm talking to any creative, what's your kind of creative origin story? Like, how did you get into writing?
Well, I think that I've always lived in a world of fantasy in my own
Mhm.
head. I've always liked coming up with stories, and like, when I was very young, being very imaginative and creating worlds and that sort of thing. But really, I've wanted to be a writer, been interested in writing since I physically could. I was in middle school with composition notebooks of, stories. The first book, if we can call it that I completed was in like seventh grade. And I think it was glorified Pirates of the Caribbean fanfic, basically. But I finished it and it
Yeah,
was probably like 20,000 words, which for seventh graders, not so bad.
yeah. So, what made you decide to, let's say, take the plunge from, just writing for yourself to actually saying, you know what, I want to put this out in the world. I want people to read my stuff. I feel like, there's something there that people can take from it.
Well, I think it's something I always wanted.
Mhm.
And then a lot of adults in my life were like, well, that's not very practical. And so by the time I got into college, I was like, well, that's not very practical.
Yeah.
And, then I met my husband and he was like, well, that's dumb. You're awesome. Do it.
Yeah.
And so he's been a huge supporter and really just, gave me permission to have confidence in myself, which
Yeah.
sometimes I think we need. And so I started writing then, and I had my kids young. And so basically, in my mind, I spent the time when they were like really needing a lot of my time, just getting better, getting good enough to publish. And, now that my oldest has started school, I've really started to lean more into my career. And I have now the experience, artistically to actually story craft, and I know how my process works and how to be productive and meet deadlines and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So now we were talking before that we started a little bit about your background with D&D. How do you feel? Do
Mhm.
you feel like D&D have had a big influence on your storytelling? And if it did, like what aspects of playing it influenced your own kind of storytelling and writing?
Well, I've always enjoyed role playing, and it's
Mhm.
just an extension of world building.
Yeah.
It's storycraft through play. I enjoy being a dungeon master very much. D&D is one of my great loves. I started out on Kickstarter producing Dungeons and Dragons materials, and a actual print version of everything I've ever done is going to be coming out in fall, and we're all very excited about that. We've been talking about doing that for years. Um, but how does it work into my writing process? That was the question. I would say that writing for role playing games and writing for books is very, very different. Writing for role playing games, you're setting up tableaus, I like to call it. Like, here's the scene, but the characters haven't entered it yet.
Mhm.
And that's of course very different than writing a novel where I get to control all the characters and what they
Yeah.
do. I do think that, it did give me some strengths in outlining, because when we were outlining a campaign, you have to kind of string these tableaus together, which helps me with kind of these like pillar moments in my books. I like to plot those out and then just kind of wing it on how to get there. So that way I can have some planning and some spontaneity, which I
Yeah.
think it's really good to have a balance of those two things and not lean too heavily one way or the other.
Yeah. Now, do you feel like you can do both at the same, like, let's say, do you feel like you can do prep work for DMing on a big campaign and also write your novel, or do you have to kind of separate the two? Like, some people can kind of compartmentalize creatively and others can't. So do you feel like because they are they are different. I've never heard anyone kind of articulate it like that. Are you able to do both at the same time, or do you often need to kind of separate the two?
Um, I have been working through material like with my own personal Dungeons Dragons party that I wrote years ago for a
Mhm.
while now. So usually I'm just digging things out of a drawer.
Yeah.
Also, I've been DMing long enough where I can usually just pull something out if I've
Yeah.
got to, like, all right, what's the monster of the week?
Yeah.
And throw in an unexpected twist, and here we go. And then just kind of wing it during the session. I'm not a big prep work person when I'm not writing material that like other people will have to run in a game that
Yeah.
I'm actually going to produce and sell.
Yeah. So I guess tell me a little bit about well, first of all, talk a little bit about your writing process. Like how long does it take for you? Do you procrastinate? Do you have to set up a schedule? Like give me some insight into your own process for writing a novel.
So my first advice to anyone who's trying to write a novel is set aside an hour every day.
Mhm.
I think trying to write for hours and hours and hours all in one sitting, you've got to kind of like work up to that. It's almost like working out at the gym, is how I like to equate it. Like you're not going to go to the gym the first day and work out for 4 hours. It's not going to happen. I find that when I haven't written in a long time, just like not going to the gym, I can only really focus my brain creatively for maybe 45 minutes, you know. I usually like to chunk it like that, the time, like 45 minutes of writing and then a little time off for a brain break. And then maybe I can do reps, right, of
Mhm.
that if I'm really in a flow. So I think having consistency and routine is huge. As far as how long it takes me to write a book, that varies drastically
Yeah.
between how complex the storylines are, how long the book itself is. The one I'm working on right now is the final book in the White Crow series, and it has taken me so much longer than I imagined it would
Mhm.
because it's the closing of the series. It's incredibly complicated, and I'm dealing with a lot of very emotional arcs, that I want to get just right. So it's been very arduous. Whereas The Widow's Tear that's about to come out, which is book 3, I think I wrote in 3 or 4 months, the first
Mhm.
draft. That being said, my books usually go through about 2.5 years of development, and that's not constant hands-on every single day. There's resting periods built into that. Usually I write it, I let it sit for a few months. And that's super important. I think that you can't,
Yeah.
well, you shouldn't. You can't.
Mhm.
You should not write your first draft and then immediately turn around and edit it because you're not going to have a new perspective yet. You're going to
Yeah.
go back with the same headspace you wrote it the first time, and you're really not going to have anything new to think about it. I like to let it sit for a couple months, then read it again with fresh eyes, and I'm going to have a lot of new ideas. I might even, that chapter I had no idea what I wanted to do with. Now I've got the full thing figured out, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I take that resting time. Then I do what I like to call the story edit, where I read through and I'm just really making sure the story's there, the characters are coming across the way that I want. I've written the whole thing. There's no gaps. Um, then I give it to beta readers, ideally, who will read through, catch things I haven't caught in the story. Like, oh, this character isn't coming off the way I want them to, or this isn't making sense. And then I will incorporate their critique and take it through like the final text editing.
So, how does someone go about finding beta readers and getting people that are going to genuinely read the book with a critical eye and give them real good feedback?
I can tell you how I did it.
Yeah.
I actually like unqualified betas.
Mhm.
I don't like giving my book to other writers or editors because that's really not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for someone to line edit my book. I'm not looking for a writer to tell me how to solve the problems that they
Yeah.
find, because that's what writers will invariably do,
Yeah.
myself absolutely included.
Yeah.
Um, I want a reader to come in and say, I don't really get this, or I don't really like that, or, oh, this is really great. I'm really vibing with this. And then I can take those. Usually I can isolate whatever their problem was and then I can come up with my solution to it,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, I networked through friends, people I knew, people I trusted,
Hmm.
who were willing to read,
Yeah.
and give me just their ideas and thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. So tell me about the White Crow series.
So it is a paranormal mystery series set in Edwardian New York City. So it's like
Mhm.
early 1900s, World War One era. The main character is Maggie, who's
Oh,
a psychic medium.
sorry about that. 1 second. Sorry, I'm in this room with a timer, and the lights will go off if I don't
Uh-oh.
move. So you can just I'll edit this. So you could just start
Mhm.
over again with the
Just
description.
from the
So
very
sorry.
beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that.
So it's a paranormal mystery series set in Edwardian, New York City. So that's like early 1900s, World War One era. The main character, Maggie, is a psychic medium. So she does like seances with ghosts, which brings in kind of a horror element. I began this series in, I think, 2013. I wrote the first draft. It was terrible. It was just one book. It ended in the most predictable, awful way possible.
Mhm.
But I was still able to, salvage some real gold from it. Um, oh, where was I? But this was before I really had a grasp on like, ooh, I'm writing for this genre and this is my
Yeah.
target audience. So it ended up being a paranormal mystery horror romance
Hmm.
historical fiction.
Okay, interesting.
So just trying, like, I fill out these forms for like events and it's like categorize your book and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Just spin the wheel.
Yeah.
um I did find early on that the readers that enjoyed it the most were paranormal mystery and horror fans. Not when I marketed it as historical fiction or romance. I don't think I found my target market
Yeah.
quite as well. Romance, it's a subplot. It's not as romantic as a romance reader is going to want, where, the love arc is front and center.
Yeah.
And for historical fiction, I do, I think, kind of a unique take. I don't do it's almost like in sci-fi. There is crunchy sci-fi like Star Trek,
Yeah.
where they explain all the science and everything's super accurate. And then there's kind of like soft sci-fi like Star Wars, where it's almost more magical.
Yeah.
I'm like that with historical fiction. I'm a little softer. I like to create the feel of 1910, but I'm not going to go into petticoats and every single detail
Yeah.
of the automobiles. I'm just creating the atmosphere to tell the story,
Yeah. So
really.
are you from New York?
I was born in New York.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
I've been to New York City.
Yeah.
I've obviously not been to New York City in 1916.
Well, what
But
made you decide to set the story in New York City at that time period?
Um, it was a really active place. That I thought Maggie being from a socialite background made a lot of sense.
Okay.
I also liked that there were a lot of different cultures mixing at the time, which allowed me to get a great diversity to the cast.
Hmm.
Which I tried really, really hard to do. It being a period piece, you are kind of constrained by the logics of the time.
Hmm.
It pains me still that in my mind, Maggie and her brother and another member of the cast, Walter, are all autistic and on the
Hmm.
spectrum, as I am myself. Really, whenever I have a character, I roll the dice and they either end up autistic or not. But anyway, autism hadn't been introduced into the lexicon during that time. It wouldn't
Hmm.
have made any sense for her to identify as autistic, have a diagnosis, or even consider it at all,
Yeah.
because it had just entered medical discussion during the time period
Hmm.
of the stories, not even during your childhood. So anyway, so you're kind of constrained by the time, but I did like that I could introduce that kind of diversity through the urban setting.
Yeah.
Also, one of the elements I bring into play is the American Society for Psychical Research.
Mhm.
Um, which is a real thing that exists in New York City to
Mhm.
this day.
Oh wow, okay.
They are funded by the government to
No,
find
really?
ghosts.
Wow, okay.
I kid you not. One of
Wow.
my favorite moments from Awakening Anne, which is book one, is that Walter, who works with this society of government funded ghost hunters,
Mm.
comes to investigate Maggie's claim of being a medium. And her brother, who really doesn't believe in, ghosts or her powers or anything, is just astonished that this person is affiliated with anything that upstanding or official.
That's funny. Yeah, I had no idea that there was an organization like that at all. I mean, I could believe it for the time, but shocking that it still exists.
They have a website that has not been updated, I believe, since my birth.
Yeah.
But they exist, I promise.
Yeah, wow. So now, did you do much research? Like, how was the research process into like getting it? I know you mentioned that you're not kind of going for like hard 100% accurate with everything, not necessarily accurate, but just kind of as detailed as some historical fiction can be. But did you do a decent amount or a lot of research like to into New York City and into what was going on at that time?
Yeah, so I've always been historically minded. The
Hmm.
only other thing in my life I've ever wanted to be besides an author was an archaeologist when I was 7.
Hmm.
I love studying different times, different cultures.
Yeah.
I've actually surprised myself. A lot of my stories that I come up with are in alternate times because I like to take women's issues
Hmm.
and, think of a time that's like particularly emblematic of that issue and then write in that setting.
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of research on a lot of like here and there eras, a lot on the fashion and the technology and, the critical periods of the time.
Yeah.
I chose 1916, like the late 1910s, particularly because it's as late as I could set a book about a psychic medium holding seances. The seance craze was really tapering down by that time.
Hmm.
I wanted to include World War One, and I definitely wanted to include the suffragette movement,
Hmm.
which I am really excited to do because I feel like that's horribly underrepresented
Yeah.
in fiction.
Yeah.
So,
So.
I do very spotty research, so I have
Mhm.
like this background of knowledge, and then every now and again, like I used a metaphor when I was writing recently about like she was thinking like burst like a balloon, and I'm like, wait, do they have balloons? And we're Googling. you know,
Yeah.
Usually that's how it goes. Is it a
Yeah.
refrigerator or an icebox? Do they have
Yeah.
cars or horses? Et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I think that would be my issue with writing anything. Well, I had to do that because my first comic that I released last year is a western. It's set like kind of post Civil War, so there were a lot of things when it comes to like how people speak, and just things at the time that it's like, wait, did this exist? There was one major thing that like I was like, wait, I just barely kind of got the time period right for it, and it's still kind of sketchy, but yeah, it's a little tricky, but but you having an eye for it and just not missing
Mhm.
those things altogether, and then having to do the research. um as a little sidebar, I was actually in a seance room recently. There's a in New Orleans, there's this restaurant, and I'm forgetting the name of it now, but they kind of we were doing like a ghost tour, and one of the stops in the ghost tour is like this restaurant, and basically the story is like a guy um, basically lost his house gambling and kills himself.
Mhm.
In I don't know, it's 1800s or something, and so he supposedly haunts this restaurant. And so the apparently the servers and staff all claim that they hear noises and things get messed up. So they built a seance room for him, and so they have this really cool, interesting lounge that's up there that we got to go to. But then what's even more interesting is there's a table set up for this ghost that every day they set the table, they put wine and bread, and that's supposed to be uh, that's supposed to calm the ghost. And supposedly the ghost is a little bit less crazy now that since they've had the table and wine
Such
and
great
everything.
accommodations.
Yeah, but it's actually a really good meal. So it was kind of cool. It's like a really good restaurant, great meal, and then you got to go and see go hang out with the ghost. So
That is
a
fun.
little sidebar. So this book, so you've run several successful Kickstarter campaigns, and as someone who's done it once so far and has a few other things kind of cooking. what are your like what did you learn from your very first Kickstarter campaign? Let's put it that way. Like, what was the things that you learned, like, right, like as somebody new, that you were able to take, moving forward into your other campaigns?
Um, oof. I would say our first one actually went really well.
Okay, yeah.
um, and other than me accidentally hitting the launch button because I didn't know what it did. And so if you look on our Kickstarter account, you'll see that we have one failed
Oh, really?
project, and it's
Okay.
because we had to cancel
Oh,
this
wow,
part,
that's funny.
this false start that I made.
Yeah,
Anyway, that was I think back in 2020.
yeah,
But anyway, so our first project did really, really well. And I think here's why. Firstly, we started out with only digital materials,
yeah,
which on the fulfillment end made everything super easy. It was just a
yeah.
PDF. We emailed it to all our backers. The pledge levels were insanely simple. I think our funding goal was like $100.
Hmm.
It was very low. Um, we kind of started in the kiddie pool, is what I
Okay.
would say, and it
Yeah,
went really, really well. Um, and then we did a few more, and they snowballed. Add-ons were definitely our friend,
yeah,
because we would start getting people to back for multiple items, which would increase our pledge total. Guilds of Aragarth was our most popular campaign for the Dungeons and Dragons materials, and
yeah.
it raised over $1,000 on just e-rewards, which
Okay.
I was quite proud of. I think the material for that one is honestly our best. Um, so anyway, we did years, at least like 3 years of just digital Kickstarters before we started doing my books, which
Yeah,
obviously we ship in physical form. And that has been a lot more
yeah,
work, particularly on the fulfillment end. It's a
yeah,
lot more moving parts because, there's multiple pledge levels and a variety of add-ons. Our input costs, like the cost for the cover art and
yeah,
to buy the materials to fulfill, is a lot higher. And then managing orders and, all of the backers, because we've had significantly higher yields in that as well.
yeah,
I'm very glad that we kind of had that warm up and that experience before
yeah.
getting here. And even then, it's been a bit of a journey.
Yeah. Well, what I
'Cause,
guess what tips do you have for, because I'm used to comics, but what tips do you have for people doing kind of traditional writing, or authors? Like what advice would you have for them as far as like setting up their first Kickstarter campaign?
um, setting up your first campaign, expect a huge rush in the beginning, and it will taper off, and you'll have this
Yeah.
huge trough in the middle. I would suggest 21 days maximum. That's
Hmm.
pretty an
Really?
ideal number.
Yeah.
Going longer than that, you can get just burnt out,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And you can't fight the trough too much. it's
Yeah.
it's just gonna happen. Really angled to get people before the Kickstarter starts, get everyone in the door. I like to do early bird specials where I
Yeah.
price down my signed paperbacks to the price of just a regular paperback, and
Yeah.
then I do a really, really good deal on my hardcover special editions,
Hmm.
um, to kind of like reward the people who are really following along, throughout the
Yeah.
year, with the special pricing. So I think early birds are your friends because it really creates a sense of urgency for your backers,
Yeah.
and rewards them too. I mean, they're getting a good deal.
Yeah.
Um, and then keeping in contact, posting regular updates, so that your backers have confidence,
Yeah.
because you will lose some backers in the last couple days. In the last 48 hours, people will jump ship, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But keeping in contact with them and reassuring them that you know what you're doing, and that,
Yeah.
oh, we're doing so great, and kind of being a cheerleader, and a community leader is really important. Almost seeing it like a community too, I
Yeah.
think. I would also say don't get too ambitious. You're like your first time out. Like, I think like running into things with, we're gonna raise $10,000, and oh please, no, no. Don't do that to yourself.
Yeah.
you know. Um, I don't buy stock before the Kickstarter.
Okay.
buy it once I know the volume I need. That way I don't
Yeah.
need to have a ridiculous funding goal. I
Yeah.
think we're doing $1,000 has been our standard for the books, which almost pays for just like the cover art and those kind of
Yeah.
costs, and our time putting the project together. And then of course we expect to fund significantly over that.
Yeah.
Um, but your funding goal shouldn't be what you expect to actually go home with,
Yeah. No,
is
that makes
what
sense.
I would say. Yeah.
Yeah.
My goal is always to fund in the first 48 hours.
Yeah. So now with comics, typically, I think there's a, you have a situation. Obviously, comics are a little bit more involved as far as the hands in the pot, right? You've got to have your writer, you have the artists, colorists, lettering, all that stuff, and it can be pricey if you want to get the book done up front, which it can be as well as an author, because if you're paying for editing, cover art, and everything, you're still
Yeah.
spending a lot of money up front. But typically with a comic, especially early on, to keep people's confidence, you want to have as close to a finished product as you can before launching. Is it the same with a book? Like, when you're ready to launch your book, are you pretty much done and it's just figuring out what you're doing for shipping, or do you still have some work left to finish the book itself?
Before I launched a Kickstarter, the text is definitely finalized
Yeah.
for the final work. I was kind of down to the wire on Widow's Tear this time around, but it is done.
Yeah.
I got the final text edit done last month. And so it is ready to go. I'm still working on the author sketches that'll go
Hmm.
in the book. And I'll probably be working on those throughout the campaign and reviewing
Hmm.
them as we go, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
I'll do the final formatting right after the campaign ends, because in the acknowledgments page, our top tier backers, the people who back for our #1 copy and then like numbers 2 through 10, will all be mentioned in the acknowledgments. So I can't
Okay.
actually order
Yeah.
prints of the book until
Yeah.
it's over.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely not still in the process of editing the actual text.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So now, what made you decide to go the, let's say, indie route versus trying to do the traditional route, or maybe you did try, like, what made you go choose the route of, I'm going to do it myself and make this work?
So, back when I decided that I was going to release Awakening Anne, I was thinking, well, we have such a ball rolling on Kickstarter. We really know what we're doing there. Awakening Anne is a tiny little book.
Mhm.
And I didn't think it would be appealing to publishers simply for word count reasons.
Yeah.
It's a little snack. And so I was like, you know what? This is just going to kind of be my test book. I'm going to put it out there, just indie and kind of like get my feet wet. And that has gone super well.
Yeah. Mhm.
I've been really just impressed, amazed, ecstatic about how fast things have built up. I'm starting to kind of refine my like appearances and author events. We're selling out at events. The Kickstarters are growing super well. And I'm very, very happy and very
Yeah.
thankful
Yeah.
to my readers for the reception. But nowadays, I don't really think that I'm looking very hard at traditional publishing. I like being able to create on my own schedule. I like being able to create what I want to create.
Yeah.
Um, I know that there's a lot of headaches when you have a publishing body about, well, is my next book going to be approved? And
Mhm.
writing a book to make sure, oh, that there's a cliffhanger good enough, but it also resolves well enough just in case I don't get approved for my next book. And oh, I couldn't live with that
Yeah.
anxiety. Um, I typically don't trust smaller printing houses.
Mhm.
I've known some people who have gotten into deals I do not envy.
Yeah.
And they've gotten some real perks. I'm not gonna say they don't help, you know, but I value my freedom, my ownership of my works, um, more than that like small leg up.
Yeah.
Um, I think at this point, if I was going to take a publishing deal, it would be like at a major house like Penguin.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a big if.
Yeah. Yeah, so no, it makes sense. I think it's great. We have this opportunity with something like Kickstarter to kind of take ownership and give ourselves. Well, I guess
Yes.
this leads into the next question for you. Now that you've reached level of success with the crowdfunding, do you see Kickstarter for yourself as more of a for funding or more for marketing, or is it kind of 50-50? Like, how do you see Kickstarter, in your own kind of career as an artist or as a creator?
I see it as a great way to deliver one-on-one to my readers. The only other opportunity I get for that is events, and
Hmm.
I have never done an event outside Ohio. So for people in Ireland or Texas or California or Australia who are reading my book, they rarely get to like interact or purchase from me directly and get signed
Right.
copies and special editions. So I like that transparency that offers, that, I'm more accessible and it does feel like a community. Um, I mean, just from a money standpoint, I do get more back from a Kickstarter,
Yeah.
because I'm not using like a third party like Amazon or anything like that. Um, so that's nice. And I think that it just kind of kickstarts the new release. It
Yeah.
immediately goes out to a whole bunch of people who are usually more invested in active readers who are very likely to review it. And that is so, so, so immensely valuable.
Yeah.
Immensely, especially for indie creators. I can't just afford to send out 300 copies of my book,
Yeah.
to people who are then paid to give it a
Mhm.
review.
Yeah.
So securing those early reviewers is another huge perk, you know, of Kickstarter. So yeah, the pre-sales have been really important.
Yeah. Now, as an author, right? If you finish Kickstarter, the book is now out in the world. What's next? Like, how do you then kind of jump on the momentum that you've built from a Kickstarter for a book?
So I focus on fulfilling the Kickstarter.
Mhm.
Generally, what I like to do is I have the Kickstarter in April and the book will officially release in June. That way, giving my Kickstarter people a bit of a head start
Yeah.
to enjoy the book before it hits the presses.
Yeah.
And then, I'll talk about it on social media, oh, the book is out, it's available. I like to make the earlier books in the series available on Kindle Unlimited to help my readership catch up to the most
Yeah.
recent release and not feel like there's a huge paywall to get to it.
Yeah.
Um, oh, what else is there? I like to do release events. My local Barnes and Noble in Mentor, Ohio is amazing. And I've worked with them for the past two books. And I
Mhm.
will be doing another release signing with them, I think on May 13th, which I'm really, really excited about. Which kind of like also like creates a buzz about the release. Um, but I would say that like the buzz of release day has not historically been as big as the Kickstarter.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. So now, tell me about tabling at events. Like, what's your approach to? Well, I guess the question is, do you table at larger like events with other authors, or do you typically do things where it's just yourself?
So my first year was very experimental, and so I did do a few like just solo appearances. I don't do that anymore,
Mhm.
except for Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
Um, because Barnes and Noble has natural foot traffic, and so people are going to come in. Um, Unless you're a huge name that people are going to like recognize
Yeah.
when they like walk by and be like super excited about, it's not worth doing a you alone signing. It's
Yeah.
really, really not. You don't have the pull, and I think it's really, really just disheartening. I'm really glad my first event was Bookfest in Akron, that was well attended. I did super well. I didn't even have Awakening Anne yet. It was right before the release, and I
Mhm.
still did great.
Mhm.
Just selling my book of TTRPG short
Yeah.
stories. And so that was a much better first experience. I would highly recommend events that are hosted by libraries and,
Yeah.
like that sort of thing, with multiple authors,
Yeah.
particularly when you're starting out.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to somebody who is tabling at an event like that?
Like how to set up your table.
Yeah, how to set up your table, how to, interacting with guests. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try to keep it to bullet points.
Yeah, sure.
So firstly, before you even get there, I recommend, they will tell you how big your table is, and they'll tell you if you're sharing it. I recommend setting up your table the night before. Um, I like to think vertically when
Mhm.
I'm placing. I think the worst possible thing you could do for tabling is to have your book lying flat on the table,
Mhm.
and nothing else, because no one is going to like crane their necks to like look down
Yeah.
at a table when they're walking through an event. You want it to be on eye level. You want it maybe angled, like cheated out so that they'll see it as they're walking by. I Being a horror paranormal writer, I just raided the Target Halloween aisle when it was clearance day and bought
Mhm.
crows and creepy
Yeah.
trees and made a floral arrangement of
Yeah.
feathers and black roses and such, and really gave it that kind of vibe right away, that they kind of knew what to expect. So using those kind of trinkets, you don't want
Yeah.
it to be too crowded, but you do want it to be eye-catching, and maybe even fun. Whenever I bring my D&D materials, I like to put out some dice because
Mhm.
people cannot resist touching dice.
Yeah.
They can't.
Yeah.
And so making your table fun, being approachable. As far as dressing yourself, I think that's incredibly important for an event. I think you want to be somewhere between, like, you want to be fun and approachable, but also professional.
Mhm.
I think if you were to like look like a lawyer or something, like in business attire, that's not very approachable.
Yeah.
But I also think if you go to the other extreme where you're like wearing a costume, that might be a little like daunting for people to come and talk to you.
Yeah.
My typical go-to look is like a printed button down with like, it's got a collar, so it's kind of nice. I mean, sometimes I'll wear like some gold earrings for it to be like a little bit polished, and then it'll have like a fun pattern. Like I have a
Yeah.
shirt with crows all over it, or, magic stuff, something that's a little bit fun, but
Yeah.
not like costumey,
Yeah. That makes sense.
right in the middle. Um, then when I'm actually there and I've set up my table, getting people to stop, you have to understand that not everybody who walks past your table is your reader. You have to not take that as a rejection. They're just not going to buy your book, and that's fine.
Yeah.
You know, um, the worst thing you can do to sell books is to get bitter about everybody who's walking past your table.
Yeah.
Most people will walk past your
Yeah.
table. It's For me, it's all about reading the eyes. If you catch someone and they're like glancing at your table and you get like a 1-2 of lingered attention, I usually throw out a hi or a hello or something like that, just opening a dialogue. And
Yeah.
sometimes they will give me these small little, oh yeah, hi, and then run away.
Mhm. Yeah.
you know or sometimes they'll then drift like a ghost closer to your table to see
Mhm.
what you have going on there, um and then you can start to give your pitch and whatnot. But doing kind of the social legwork of opening the dialogue, if they're feeling a little socially anxious, can be a really helpful tool, and it can help you weed out the people who are interested, without like attacking people,
Yeah.
because nobody wants to feel like they're being accosted or sold to.
Absolutely.
you know um when you're actually explaining what your book is, because you're going to have to do that, I think it's a mistake to start just summarizing the plot of your book, because
Yeah.
that's not really what they want. I start with, like I did earlier in this podcast, I start with the genre. It's a paranormal mystery with flavors of horror and romance. And if they're still looking at me and they're still interested, then I continue to talk. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and the main character is a psychic medium in New York City. And usually by this time, they've given me a signal of interest, like, ooh, or
Yeah.
okay, or something like that. And then I can continue, like, this is the first book, this is the second book, these are the pricing, you know, et cetera, and just kind of like opening a dialogue, you
Yeah.
know, and connecting them with the reader. I try not to bring up price too quickly, you know, because again, you don't want to be like rushing them through the
Yeah.
process. I think people at book events want to dialogue with you,
Yeah.
you know, particularly if your book is interesting to them, because that means you're probably interesting to them,
Yeah.
you know, being the person who wrote it.
Yeah. That makes sense. I had my first experience tabling at a comic convention, and one of the a couple things stood out. One is I need to work on my own pitch for the book, which is something I
Mm-hmm.
did not think about. But also that the people that I had, like, there were people who really just wanted to talk about like the creative process, about writing, and those were the best conversations. And strangely enough, like I can think of, like, the three easiest sales were the ones where we were just talking about writing, and then I thought they were just gonna like head out and like, all right, how much is the book? And I
Yep.
didn't try, I wasn't trying to sell. We were just talking about stuff, and that was, that worked.
Never undervalue that personal connection,
Yeah.
because that's really why people are there. These people are going out of their way to go to an event to meet local authors and
Yeah.
creators. You know, if they just wanted to buy a book, they'd go to a bookstore,
Yeah.
you
No,
know?
that's fair.
So engaging with them is a lot of the value. And if you reciprocate, like, they'll often reciprocate, you know,
Yeah.
that value.
Absolutely. Well, Kaylin, this has been great. Can you share with our listeners again, the info on the Kickstarter and how people can get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah, great. So I am on Facebook, Kaylin Applewhite author. I'm also on Instagram and Blue Sky under Applewhite Write. And all of those will be updated with updates on the Kickstarter. It launches on April 8th. The early birds are only available for the first 2 days. They end at April 9th, midnight, with EDT, Ohio time.
Mhm.
It will launch on the 8th at 9 a.m., barring apocalypse. And I'm super excited. It's going to be a really good time. I think it might be our biggest one yet. Who knows? We've spent a lot of time preparing for this one, and I'm really excited.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I would love to have you back on when the next book's coming out.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome.